So when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was 5'3", about 95 pounds, and I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually, my boyfriend, who was already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out that he was cheating on me, actually. And well, there was usually a few of us girls there waiting, but this day I was the only one there. So I sat down on the bench, and I had one headphone in and one out so that I could listen to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me, and as I waited, a black Honda pulled up, and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I just had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious by any means that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy, but after a few minutes, two big men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park and these guys were creeping me out. Of course, he didn't text back, so I copy-pasted the same text on my cousin who was home. I lived with my aunt and my two guy cousins, who was unwinding down from his night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make and colour, plus that it was two men, but I didn't get any responses. When they got out of their car, they started to walk towards me, so I got up from the bench and walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute anyway. The driver actually ended up being a little bit late as well, and as I stood by the street, these men walked up to me and I could just feel the bad energy. But one guy said hello as the other stood there staring me down. I just sort of did a small half smile and a nod and then looked away. And then the same guy, who I'll call number one, asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy, number two, was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. Then number one kept asking me yes or no questions like, do you have a boyfriend? Do you live close by? Do you do drugs? We have some. Do you want some? And then two asked me if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body and I got the chills instantly. Two was quiet the whole time and started to tell me that they just got back from Russia, but the way he said it was just really creepy. Almost intimidating, in fact. I knew that they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I just couldn't pin the place. They kept telling me to get into their car because they have drugs. I just said no thank you. Trust me, I wasn't a straight edge in high school, but I was not stupid either. I would never get into somebody's car that I didn't know. Then number one asked if I have a car. I said no and that my bus is almost here, sorry I have to go. And by some sort of miracle, the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they asked me questions, but before the bus got to me, number one handed me a card and said that he has a car shop and to call him sometime if I need anything. He even stated that he'd give me a free car if I wanted. The card looked shifty, and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew that I needed that number on it to report it. So I took it, and they walked off super fast. Finally, the bus stopped and picked me up. And as soon as I got on, I started to cry, and I just had a complete meltdown. It was like all of the adrenaline was keeping my mind and my body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind just gave out. Thankfully, there weren't that many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what had happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said that she saw them around me, but thought that I knew them because, well, they were so close to my person. The driver called into a dispatch saying that there was an incident so that they could notify the school. She continued to pick all the other students up, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office and I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out and so did the campus security. They were really sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men, and they proceeded to ask me questions about the men, their car, and even the questions the creeps asked me. I cried the whole time, and then I pulled out the card the guy gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said that he was going to call it and act like my dad, so he did. It was on speaker, and number one answered. I knew his voice as if it was burned into my brain at that point. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack as well. but the principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said that his daughter, me, gave him the card, and as soon as he said that, the guy just hung up. They tried calling again, and the phone was shut off, and then eventually disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and even the security as soon as the phone clicked. The security got on his phone and called the police and had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew that it was real, like my crazy story wasn't just made up. The principal eventually excused himself and the security guard as well, and they talked for a minute in the hall. I could hear everything that they were saying. She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call her parents to come and get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and the security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me that it sounded like they were watching us girls at that park because they chose the one day that one of us was alone there. He also said that the card was being used as bait to get me to go where they wanted. I felt sick and I just couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that actually picked up first was my boyfriend, believe it or not. One of the officers talked to him as the other finally got a hold of my aunt, though. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I just cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle and aunt, my mum and my cousins were all out front. The women were all in tears, and the men were absolutely livid, but also worried for me. And a week later, some girl at another high school, not far from the park, was saved by other students. She was apparently being dragged into a black Honda by two guys. The other kids stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out of their car. The principal called me into his office, and that's actually how I found out. They also had the same officers there, and they even had me choose the two guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out quickly, and they were caught. And yes, it was in fact those same two guys that tried grabbing that second girl too, a freshman girl. Quite honestly too, I felt worried for her and sad that she went through worse than I did. But I must admit that I almost felt free again. Still scared, but not looking over my shoulder so often, because I couldn't believe that they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. My boyfriend, and now ex, also took me some days. And I guess that I'm just thankful to be alive and well. And I am even more thankful that the girl was also saved by the courageous kids at her high school. So, I've timelined and tried to write everything down that I remember about these experiences to give me a bit of a guide when writing this. But it all started from when I was very young, and the first instance of this happening was when I was living with my grandmother. Her and I were very close. This will play in later. I was wide awake in bed, unable to sleep with her to my right. There's no doubt in my mind that she was deeply asleep, only a few inches from me. Every television in the house was off, and the only other person in the house was my grandfather asleep in his room. Then, very clearly and also really loudly, I hear my grandma call from the kitchen. It was almost as if she was calling me for dinner. It was that loud. I know it's common to hear your name being called mistakenly, but I did more research on this as a teen, and apparently when you hear your name being called this loud, you're supposed to reject it. I didn't at the time. Not knowing this, I just huddled closer to my grandmother and kept my eyes locked on the open door. The second instance was probably around when I was 13 or 14, when my father took me on a family trip to Las Vegas. We visited some part of the Grand Canyon, and while my family was waiting in line for a skywalk bridge that we had paid a tour for, I wandered around the edge a good distance away from my family and decided to yell my name into the canyon to hear my echo. When it came back to me, it sounded sort of distorted and almost like grandmother had yelled my name back. It may not have been my grandmother exactly, but it was eerily similar for some reason. Nevertheless, just the fact that it was distorted was enough to scare me a little. I don't really put much weight into this particular experience because it might have just been my voice being thrown weird, but I just thought that I should mention it. But this next one happened when I was 13 or 14 as well. It's the most terrifying one that I've had, and every time that I tell this story to people, I start to cry or even tear up a bit. This is the closest that I've ever been to whatever this is, and proves my point that it's mimicking people that I care about. So I was on vacation with my family in Key West and had rented a home. I invited my best friend, who we'll call Ash, to stay with us. On the third day, we had decided to skip out on the boating trip and mooch off of the house's owner's Netflix all day. On about the fifth episode of what we were watching, we decided on a snack refill and a bathroom break. So we paused the television and I make my way to the kitchen. I believed that Ash had followed me into the kitchen, I think, and leaned on the island while I prepared some chips with my back turned to her. I held a full conversation with her and even looked back at her on her phone. I fully had no doubt in my mind that I was talking and looking at Ash on her phone. She was even holding it in the specific way that Ash does. I turned my back for a split second to pick up the bowls and suggest that we head back to the couch when I see Ash, or the real Ash anyway, walk out of the bathroom, which was a solid 30 feet away. My body immediately went cold, and the first thing that I asked her was how she got to the bathroom and in and out without me hearing her like that. She then gave me the weirdest look and told me that she'd been in there the whole time since we got up. This is where I start freaking out and insisting that I had just been talking with her and even physically saw her. She joked about doppelgangers and how maybe she was going to die. I quickly suggested that we get out of the house and walk around the neighborhood. She then informed me that she had gotten her period while she was in the bathroom the same time that I was talking to whatever I was talking to. And then we walked around until my mum called me that she was back in the house. We're still best friends to this day and have been for 11 years now. I asked her about it today before I wrote this as well, and she said that she didn't hear me talking with anybody at all the whole time that I was apparently out there. Now, at this point, you guys must think that I'm crazy, I know, but for this next one, I actually have a witness. Honestly, too, I felt like I was a little crazy after it happened with people who freaked out as much as me. But again, I was on vacation near the Great Smoky Mountains, just a little west in Tennessee, though. We had our previous reservations cancelled, so we took this little rundown cabin owned by a local woman. We got there late at night, and the moment we all stepped out of the car, the first thing that we heard was a man's voice saying, "Hey neighbours," coming from a cabin to the left of ours that was higher up on the mountain that we were on. We couldn't see the cabin really, just a road that led further up, so we assumed that he could see us, but we just couldn't see him. Probably some guy on his balcony, right? Well, my friendly stepdad yelled, "Hey," and he waved up towards the direction that it came from. It wouldn't have been that weird if this didn't happen every time that we stepped out of the cabin or the car, and my family completely wrote it off as some type of hospitality that we're not used to in Miami. Retelling it though, my brother and my friends agreed that it was a bit weird. I did hear constant footsteps around the cabin at night, and some outside my window too. It was a raised cabin, so probably a story or two off the ground. But I don't give it much thought, since wildlife is a thing in the woods, and it's just something that I thought that I should mention. But the thing that really propelled me into researching what the heck was happening to me was when I was having a photo shoot in the woods behind the cabin, and both my brother, sister, and I too heard something calling my name deeper into the woods. Since I was with my younger siblings, I went into full big sister protection mode, and almost threw them back into the little slope that we had to climb to get into the woods in the first place. We were all just crapping ourselves from how clear it was and how we all pinpointed it was coming from deeper in the woods, and nowhere near the cabin. This was during the day too, and we were all so thrown by this that we just stayed in for the rest of our trip. We all agreed though that it was a woman's voice, and the first thing that I asked my mum when we got inside was, "Did you call me?" She had been lounging in her room with my stepdad all day, trusting that I could take care of the younger ones just outside the cabin. She saw how freaked out the kids were though, and we just didn't really go out at night for the rest of our trip. I think that I reacted so badly to this one mostly because, well, I had kids to take care of and I could tell that they were terrified out there. Again, though, the voice sounded like somebody was looking for me or calling for me back somewhere. With no knowledge of what this could have been, though, I had finally decided to look into things when I turned 17. I had no previous knowledge of Wendigos or Skinwalkers or anything cryptid, only ghost investigations and Zach Baggins making something out of a scratchy EVP or something like that. But to be quite honest with you guys, I'm just sort of desperate for answers now because at this point, I'm constantly thinking about it and driving myself into rabbit holes of information and myths and legends, just trying to figure it out. And if you've listened this far, thank you for listening. I know that I'm not the best storyteller and recounting may not be that good, but I was trying to get everything and all the details into a cohesive manner. But please, do let me know if you guys have any thoughts or ideas about what this all could mean. This story begins with my boyfriend. He had his foot operated on a few days prior to this, so he was still walking on crutches. We wanted to go to the city centre to hang out with some friends and get some drinks and whatnot, but since cycling wasn't an option because of the crutches, we live in the Netherlands, so basically we use our bicycles for everything. We decided to walk. We actually don't live that far out of the centre, about a 15-minute walk I would say, so it seemed like the most logical choice at that time. We left the centre around 2 in the morning. The way to our house is heavily populated and there are always people on the streets. This night, however, it was oddly quiet. We were about 5 minutes on the way when I spotted a guy on the opposite side of the street. He was looking at the shop windows, but also sort of keeping an eye on us. I suddenly felt very vulnerable, if that's the right word, considering my boyfriend was walking on crutches and me being quite small. I'm like 5 feet. The guy walked in the opposite direction, but then walked back again, doing this a few times. I tried to walk faster, but my boyfriend couldn't keep up, so we had to keep quite a slow pace. When all of a sudden, the guy crossed the road really quickly in a straight line towards us. I'm small but fierce, so I was ready to fight, when suddenly, around a corner, a homeless man just came walking towards us and the man. He was shouting and cursing to no one in particular. Apparently the homeless man had frightened the creepy guy so much that he immediately just ran away. We walked away as quickly as we could, and we kept looking back to see if this creepy guy had followed us, obviously, but we thankfully didn't see him again. I fully believe that the creepy guy had bad intentions. Maybe robbing us, maybe even worse. I'm not too sure, but I also believe that that homeless man, he saved us, intentional or not, and for that, I'll forever be grateful.